what comes to mind is perhaps some of the history or some of the existing ways that organisations tend to operate at the moment, and they tend to operate on something like a 12-month cycle of work, which is
Absolutely. Yep.
which is underpinned and some might argue constrained by a 12-month budget
Sure.
cycle. So
Yep.
12 months at the start, we come up with what we believe is going to be successful for the department.
Yep.
Maybe not necessarily wider business, but certainly at a departmental level.
Yeah.
And and um, and as the world becomes more and more surprising, just thinking about the occurrence of 2020,
I like that. Surprising.
yeah,
I like that. It's a good word.
and as the world becomes more interconnected and faster paced,
Yep.
perhaps that 12-month budget cycle needs to be questioned and maybe broken up into smaller budget
Yes.
cycles. So I guess that's a traditional approach, and Agile is recognizing that we need to be able to pivot and we need to be a little bit more
Mm.
responsive. And,
Yeah.
and my impression, it may be a wrong impression, that from the financial side, perhaps they are quite accustomed and to that 12-month budget cycle. So it's going to be quite a big change potentially for them, changing expectations of ways of working.
I think the conversation will actually draw out the fact that it probably isn't as uncomfortable as it looks from the outset. Because I think what we need to do is we need to get rid of those myths. We're sort of, first time you hear about agile, you get this concept that there's no planning, for example, that there's
Mm.
no end date to the project and all these sorts of things, which of course just isn't true. With agile, there's far more planning that goes on because you're doing it so much more frequently. And I think it's by having those conversations in with the right words, with the right language. You can't use agile speak to bring on board somebody who's been doing finance all their lives, and vice versa. Um, but if you think about for me, if you think about the annual cycle, it is still absolutely right to have an annual or even a multi-annual vision of where you want to go, and to have a roadmap. You should definitely do that. But when it comes to the detail, when it comes to the amount of time invested in your plans, the horizon needs to be a lot closer, needs to be a lot shorter, because we know that no plan survives contact with the enemy. We spend 4 months preparing a budget in minute detail for the year, and come January 1st, boom, it starts to change. I mean, this year has been the best example of that. How many man months were invested in pulling together all the budgets for 2020, only to find that by the end of January things were starting to crumble. By February things were looking crazy. By March everything was out the window, and you had to completely think again. And I think those organizations that have already adopted an agile mindset would have just stepped over this very, very simply and very easily, and found it, not found it that uncomfortable, because, okay, great, well, this is the new plan now. And you make changes. And I think if you try and hold any organization that tries to hold people to the promises that they made in January, at the end of this year, I think are kind of like a bit crazy, because there's no way you can do that. And I think that's the mindset that we need to change. Still have the plan, still have a year's outlook. It should be a rolling annual outlook that moves through
Hmm.
time. But you're absolutely right. We need to our focus and our energy needs to be on what we can control now, and adapt and be adaptable to the changes.